All right, we can start.
Yes.
All right, Deputy Director of the Arab Reform Initiative, and it is my pleasure to be moderating today's discussion, this evening's discussion, research and studies on the Mediterranean and the Middle East, iReMMO. And we'll be looking at today the contextual reasons as well as the organizational. Discussion is a really important one because of what we're seeing on the ground. Despite the declaration of the United States a few years ago that ISIS had been defeated, that's not the reality on the ground. Speaking with aid workers and local presence of ISIS, the growing presence of ISIS in places such as Deir ez-Zor, and local populations talk about this and the impossibility of planning for their futures or reestablishing livelihood, knowing what's going to come next because of this resurgence. But we also know about this from the many reports that have been coming out about what is happening in the prisoner camps, for example, both those housing ISIS fighters as well as their families, such as Al-Hol camp, and how this is turning into a breeding ground for further recruitment and radicalization, but also a resource stream for ISIS. So we know that the reality is that there is this resurgence. So today's discussion is going to be looking at these various factors that are contributing to this, both the contextual ones that are creating conditions for resurgence, as well as the organizational ones, both the objective and the subjective factors that are allowing for a reorganization and reconstitution of the organization itself. And I'm joined today in this event by two important speakers who are both experts on the topic. So first we'll be hearing from Virginie Sauner, who is an associate researcher at iReMMO. She teaches history and geography and geopolitics in Chicago. And she'll be presenting her latest publication, which is available in Confluences Méditerranée, which is available on the iReMMO website. That publication is called Birth and Development of Daesh in a Context of Iraki. So she'll be providing us with a historical overview of the formation of the organization, as well as some reflections on its reconstitution since 2019. And we'll also be hearing from Ibrahim Sadiq Malazada, who is also an associate researcher at iReMMO, and he's a visiting fellow at the Center for Trust, Peace, and Social Relations at Coventry University. So just as a matter to start our event.
Hi, its political and military ambitions. However, the conditions that contributed to the birth, the emergence, and the anchoring of the group Daesh in Iraq became the capital of radical Islamism. And after the destruction by the US Army of jihadist camps in Afghanistan, Biara saw the arrival of Al-Qaeda fighters. And at the beginning of 2002, Ansar al-Islam officially became the branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraqi Kurdistan. And among those fighters who joined Iraqi Kurdistan, there is Abu Musab al-Zarqawi that played a very important role in developing the program of radical jihadism in Iraq. And so between 2003 and 2014, the country's internal structural problems were exacerbated by the intervention of the US and its consequences, which allowed Daesh to gradually succeed in establishing itself in Iraq. So the group has been able to respond to the resentment of Arab Sunnis and the knowledge of the ground and of local actors by many fighters of ISIS was a very determined factor in its development in Iraq. So the jihadist organization is born out of the Iraqi failed state and the process of fragmentation, communitarization that the country underwent following the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's regime. And the main stages of the Salafist orientation taken by the Sunni rebellion in Iraq and the development of Daesh are the corollary of the mistakes made by American policy and the exactions committed against Sunni Arabs by the pro-Shiite regime in Baghdad. And if we go back very quickly, a century earlier, when Iraq was created in 1921, the power was given to the Sunni community, which represent around 20% of the population. So the British, like the Ottomans before, they relied on the Sunni community. And after World War I, the Kurds and the Shiites, who made up nearly 75% of the population, they were excluded from the new state. And so in March 2003, the US launched the Operation Iraqi Freedom, with the aim of overthrowing the Ba'ath political party and Saddam Hussein, who was president of the Republic since 1979. And at that time, the problems were already numerous in Iraq, which is a country very destabilized by 4 decades of conflict and several crises. And in April 2003, after the capture of Baghdad and the announcement by George W. Bush of the end of military operations, the administration of Iraq was placed under the authority of Paul Bremer. And the decisions were taken in the days following his arrival in Iraq. And these decisions were influenced by the neoconservatives very present at the White House at that time. And the decisions, they reflect the ignorance of the US of Iraqi history, dynamic, and issues. And the 2 orders promulgated clearly showed the intention of the US to destroy what made the structure, the functioning of Iraq. So in 2003, the regime change project seemed to orient American policy in Iraq. So I just would like to present quickly these 2 orders. So order number 1 was signed on May 12, 2003, and it's called the de-Baathification of Iraqi society. So the de-Baathification of the civil service was organized, and this party, which was created in 1952 and in power in Iraq since 1968, was totally dissolved. And the order number 2, dissolution of entities, organized the dismantling of the Iraqi army, of the intelligence services, and all the security forces of Saddam Hussein's regime. And about 400,000 soldiers were deprived from one day to another of income in a country very already marked by economic difficulties and the endemic corruption that started in 1991 with the economic sanctions. So this was the end of the quasi-monopoly of Sunni Arabs in the army and in the administrations. And so that minority doesn't concentrate the power anymore. And the Kurds and the Shiites excluded from the old system, they were promoted within the framework of the US political project. So there is a reversal of alliances that took place 100 years after the birth of Iraq. And also these 2 decrees, they mark the starting point for the breakup, the destructuring and chaos that Iraq was about to experience. And in 2003, considering the Sunni Arabs as an homogeneous group and associating them as a whole with the Saddam Hussein regime was part of the strategic errors of the choices made by the American administration. And the policy of de-Baathification was undertaken by the Shiite elites who came to power in Baghdad. And the policy affected the whole Iraqi Sunni society, whose members were and still are victims of real brutalizations. And these new Shiite elites, they implemented the desunification of the country without making any distinction between moderate Sunnis and radical Sunnis. So as a consequence, many uprisings took place in Sunni Arab regions where violence, humiliations were committed by the American army against civilians. And in 2003, the armed insurrection was not motivated by the jihadist movement alone, even though it was already established in the country. And the Arab Sunni minority continued to be excluded from the Iraqi democratic transition process. And quotas were set up according to community criteria for participation in the provisional government. So there is a very clear amalgam between political parties and religions. And the Shiite demographic majority allows it to obtain the political majority. And so Arab Sunnis, they were reduced to a minority status and marginalized by the new political institution. So the US political reconstruction project in Iraq was clearly based on community affiliation. And it marks the failure of the US nation building project. And then there are the two battles of Fallujah in 2004, led by the US Army, that marked the beginning of the Salafist orientation taken by a minority of Sunnis who considered Shiites to be enemies of Islam and who had to be fought in the same way as the American occupier. And in February 2006, the attack on the Samarra mausoleum plunged the country into a civil war of a sectarian nature, what we usually call the War of the Mosques, and attributed to the Iraqi branch of Al-Qaeda. This attack offered the Shiite government a justification for the continued exclusion of Arab Sunnis. And also many former officers of Saddam Hussein's army, they had become major elements of the Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia. And the group was led from 2004 to 2006 by the Jordanian Abu Musab al-Barkawi. And this former army soldier joined the Sunni rebellion at that time when it was gradually moving towards Salafist movements. And these soldiers, they have suffered from frustration, violence, humiliations. And when they join the Salafist movements, they have a lot of military equipment. They have a strong knowledge of the ground and, of course, many military skills. And at the same time as the political and administrative reorganization of Iraq, the US was engaged in the creation of a new army. And the Shiite militias constitute the backbone of this new army. And that's the reason why many Arab Sunnis, they rejected this army, which was considered as an occupying force. And the abuses against Arab Sunnis were numerous, and they contributed to the radicalization and Salafization of the rebellion. And members of Sunni tribes, also victims of discrimination by the Shiite authorities, they join step by step the ranks of the Salafist organization. And in October 2006, an important next stage, the Consultative Council of Mujahideen in Iraq was created, and it proclaimed the Islamic State of Iraq in several predominantly Sunni provinces, and participated in the sectarian war. And its strength was to offer Iraqi Sunni a discourse that rejects, that condemns their alienation. And it also provides many men with a means of livelihood. But still in 2006, not everyone adheres to the radical discourse of Al-Qaeda. It's the sectarian policy of the Iraqi government that accentuated the frustrations of the Sunni side. And much of the increase in violence during this period can be explained by the increased training and provision of weapons to Sunni rebels by the jihadist organization. And during that time also, there were many displacements of thousands of Iraqi Sunni civilians who have been forced to leave the predominantly Shia populated areas. And many of them, they joined the strongholds held by the Islamic State. And however, still the Arab Sunnis, they don't all support the group. The support is far to be unanimous, and especially because of the violence. And this is the case of tribal Czechs of the province of Al-Anbar. And at the end of 2006, they created the Al-Anbar Awakening Council, the SAWA. And the SAWA militias were developed thanks to the financial and logistical support of the US. And they were fighting Al-Qaeda, and they could benefit from the number of soldiers deployed during the Iraqi surge. So this military alliance helped to push back the terrorist organization in Al-Anbar province, but it also increased the division within the Sunni rebellion. But for sure, it's a setback for the group. And in 2010, the Iraqi Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi became the leader of the organization. And this is the moment from which the group really developed. And December 2011, it's the departure of US troops from Iraq, and that left the field open for the repression of Sunnis by the Shiite government of Nouri al-Maliki. And the prime ministers refused to integrate the very experienced and skilled Sawa soldiers into the Iraqi army, which encouraged them to join the Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's organization. And then came 2012, and it's another turning point because there is the war in Syria, and the war allows the jihadist group to consolidate its organization. And in 2012, there are many peaceful demonstrations in Iraq in Sunni areas to express solidarity with the Syrian Sunnis, who were also victims of violence by the Damascus government. And a very strong repression was put in place by al-Maliki. And as a result, Sunni Arabs who had previously been hostile to al-Baghdadi's group, they gave it more and more massive support. And at that time, the jihadist organization is becoming a possible alternative. And then the territorial expansion once started in Syria and then in Iraq was very fast. So during 2013, there were many protests and still an extreme violence against the Sunni Arabs in Iraq. So more Sunni tribes joined Daesh during that period of time. And so January 2014, it's the capture of Fallujah, with much less media coverage than the one of Mosul in June 2014. And so Daesh was able to develop in this context of fragmentation, of communautarization and exacerbated violence. And it's the result of years of alienation of Sunni Arabs by the Shiite government in place since 2003. And this marginalization is still existing today. So end of 2017, it's the military defeat of Daesh in Iraq and in Syria in spring 2019. But the group never disappeared, and that's why we talk about resurgence and not return of Daesh, and clearly shows its ability to survive. It's a very resilient, innovative, a more diverse group that had and is still having the ability to reinvent itself. And the fall of the caliphate proved that the group doesn't need a territory to survive. And this is an important point because in 2013-14, Daesh has invaded the jihadism because it has territorialized it, something that refused to do before Daesh, groups like Al-Qaeda or even the Iraqi jihadists before Daesh. So that was a break. And then after 2017 and 19, Daesh had to deterritorialize its action. And today it doesn't have any territory to defend anymore. And its fighters are not exposed the same way to attacks. So it allows the group to come back to a more classical insurrectional terrorist organization that can multiply suicide operations, surprise attacks with microgroup. And in Iraq, today, all the conditions are met for the resurgence of the organization because the Sunnis, they are still desperate. So I very quickly would like to highlight three main ideas about the resurgence today in Iraq. So first, the fighters. So the fighters, many of them, they went underground at the end of 2017. Some others, they diluted into the population. Some others are in refugees or displaced camps. So there is a breeding ground. There is a pool of fighters today in Iraq. And most of these fighters today, as in 2012 or 13, they are Iraqi. So they still have this very strong knowledge of the country. And the soldiers, they are also in Iraq today much more flexible than during the caliphate, which makes it more difficult to fight them. And we have today, there are around 2,500 US soldier in Iraq, but for how long? So that will depend on the decision of Joe Biden. Second thing, the Sunnis, they are still marginalized. So in Iraq, ISIS cannot be defeated without real perspectives for the Arab Sunni population. And the Sunni territories, they were totally destroyed between 2014 and 2017. And the reconstruction hasn't really started yet. And the Shia militias that took place in some Sunni areas after the capture of Mosul, for example, they start again that cycle of violence with humiliation, forced relocations, exactions against these Sunni. So there is a feeling of abandonment, there is an extreme poverty, a lack of public services, drinking water, education, jobs, hospitals, and so on. So because there is the political, the economic and social exclusion, Daesh is a possible solution again. And third point for Iraq is about the tensions between Erbil and Baghdad, and the fact that they are a gray zone. So when there is a security vacuum on a territory, it allows Daesh to get implemented again. So this is something that benefits the resurgence of the group. And the border between Iraq and Syria is not safe today, and jihadists move on both sides of it. And many sleepers and underground cells from Iraq are connected to the ones in Syria. And in Syria, like in Iraq, the group never disappeared. And we've been noticing a spike in Daesh attacks and activities since the beginning of 2021. And there is that same economic and social distress. So Daesh in Syria takes advantage of the different forces involved in controlling some areas, some territories. So today there is a growing threat, especially in the Badia desert, which is a very strategic place for Daesh. And there is a lack of governance, and population is desperate. And ISIS today is harassing the Syrian army. And like in Iraq, the reconstruction is very, very slow in Raqqa, for example. So in both countries, ISIS is looking for a political, social, security and economic vacuum to re-establish itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginie. Not only was that incredibly interesting historical overview of how the original sin of the war, the American-led war in Iraq, kind of provided the factors that allowed for these grievances, the production of marginalization, exclusion, that allowed for this to come about in the first place, but also how that ties in with the same processes that we're seeing today, and all the issues with reconstruction, how that actually creates the same conditions. Also, you were perfectly on time, so thank you very much. Okay, I think we'll turn it over now to Ibrahim.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing my slides. Okay, thank you very much for iReMMO for preparing this opportunity for us. The title is the resurgence or reorganizations. I'm going to focus on two aspects of this subject, the theoretical subject and the practical subject, or I can say the objective dimensions and subjective dimensions. ISIS or Salafi jihadism. ISIS is a version of Salafi jihadism. It's a circle of Salafi jihadism. It is in very short definition, a doctrine built on a set of religious principles. So there is three important principles for this ideology. The first one is monotheism. Monotheism, all Muslims believing in monotheism, but this monotheism is politicized. It means that if you are a monotheist or believing in one God, then you have to refuse all non-Islamic governments or non-Islamic societies or any non-Islamic political systems. And the second principle is loyalty and disavowal. So if you are a Muslim, a good Muslim, you have to have a loyalty to a Islamic political system or Islamic state, in another word, and you have to refuse all another non-Islamic political systems, even if there is a Muslim countries, or even the government, all the political elite are Muslims. But as long as they are not practicing Sharia law, they are non-Muslims and they have to be refused. So in this political ideology, there is two worlds. Dar means world or house, world of Islam, and Dar al-Kufr, or world of Kufr, or blasphemy. So these two theoretical principles are very important for any Muslim Islamists, I can say. And then to reach these two principles, you have to believe in jihad. So jihad is the only way to reach an Islamic society and a Muslim political or political Islam, political Muslim system or Islamic system. Therefore, I consider the Islamic State as a type of this doctrine. The theoretical father of this doctrine, of this ideology, is Sayyid Qutb. He announced at that time in 60s the ignorance of society and the necessity of fighting. So the society, if they are not trying to build an Islamic society, then they are belongs to non-Islamic political system, and they have to be refused. So they are ignorance. And to change this situation, you have to believe in fighting, and you have to fight. So the first group depend on this kind of ideology. Was takfir wal hijra at that time. It means infidelize and immigration. So you have infidelize the society, refuse the society because they are not obeying an Islamic system, and then you have to immigrate from this society. You can't live anymore inside this kind of society. There is another versions of the Islamic jihadists or Salafi jihadists. Some of them refusing to targeting civilians. They believe that the government should be changed. And we have another version, which is Al-Qaeda, is known for all of us. So there is another principle when we are coming to an Islamic society and to the Islamic State, and it is the religious jurisprudence. So religious jurisprudence is important, or in another word, Sharia law is important for an Islamic society. So I'm coming to the reason why I am talking to this. Talking about this kind of theoretical principles. There is some pointers. One of the first one is the Sunni segment believes in the an Islamic State. When we are coming to the details, there is difference. They are not agreed to, for example, what ISIS did in implementing Sharia law. They are not agreed, but in the general image, they are agreed to or they want to build an Islamic State. Of course, Shia Muslims, they have own version. The most famous one is Vilayati al-Faqih, or guardianship of the Islamic jurist. The sectarian motivation in the region, which my colleague spoke about it, the sectarian motivation is most help ground for the Daesh to live in these areas. So we see Daesh is not living in the Arab Shia territories, and they are not living in Kurdish, for example, in Iraq, in Kurdish territory, and in Syria the same. So why is that? Because they are finding an appropriate ground in the Sunni Arab territories, and still they are profiting from the sectarian conflict. So ISIS ideology is equal to history of Islamic jurisdiction and Sharia law. There is, I'm just mentioning 2-3 examples for that. The system of captivity and slavery, it is not abolished in Islam, and you can find tens of sections in Quran that they implemented this principle against the Yazidi Kurds, and they captured thousands of Kurdish girls, and they have been sold in the black market. And the second principle is killing an apostate from Islam. There is no way for a Muslim to apostate. So this, when we are coming to the details, to the different schools, there is different views for that. But in principle, specifically for the radicalists, there is no way for any Muslim to apostate. So this is in their view, secularists are apostate. Secularists are dirty people, so they have to fight any secular political system in the Islamic world. There is another principle is important, but maybe for normal Muslims too, and it is forbidding the vice or evil. So all Muslims are required to be against anything bad, anything evil, and this is for jihadists, for radicalists, is an important principle to implement in their life. So ISIS is a circle of jihadism or of radicalism. If they are disappeared, we have to expect another groups, like maybe more extremist, like Daesh or ISIS. So therefore, ISIS is represented by a group of ideas. And if you see anywhere, any group, it is not necessary to be exactly ISIS. And when we equalize ISIS with radicalism and just ISIS are radical, that is that is, yeah, we are fronting a kind of problematic. So therefore, the first most dangerous group in the after the 60s, depend on the ideology of Sayyid Qutb, was at-Takfir wal-Hijra in Egypt. They were called originally Jama'at al-Muslimin. Jama'at al-Muslimin means there is this group are Muslim group. So there is other Muslims not allowed to be outside this group. If they are considering themselves as Muslim, they have to be member of this group. This group led by Shukri Mustafa, and they were upshot from Muslim Brotherhood. And as I said, it was dependent on the ideology of Sayyid Qutb. So when we have any time, when we have an appropriate political and military and economic conditions anywhere in Iraq or Syria or in another countries, we have to expect such as radicalism to act. The second objective dimension is politics and the fragility of the state. It is specialized maybe for the Middle East region, specifically Iraq and Turkey. We have fragile states, and my colleague spoke about it. Fragile state actually against itself, not just against its citizens. So we are confronting the kind of problematic issues when we are coming to this kind of states. There is always instability, and we can see oppression throughout this history, oppression and genocide. These fragile states, or specifically Iraq and Syria, they have been or built, formed internationally for the balance, interests, and powers in the region, and also to secure energy resources. This is just an opinion. But nationally, which is most important, specifically in Iraq, Iraq has always been a vehicle for non-Iraqi dreams. For example, until from the 1920 to 2003, Iraq have been a dream of the unity of the Arab nations and pan-Arab nationalism. Actually, when the King Faisal came to Iraq, he brought with himself the pan-Arab nationalism. And he brought with himself Sati al-Husari, the prophet of pan-Arab nationalism. And he brought to the education center, and he stayed in this education center for around 30 years. In Iraq, he was responsible for the education program in Iraq. And after 2003, of course, the Shia the domination, and we see since 2003, Iraq is dominated by Iran, and in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in the region, generally Shia are dominating and trying to dominate Iraq and Syria specifically. So the unstable political situation in the region, the first reason is religious sectarianism, which is very active until now, and it has historical dimensions. And I consider Shia and Sunnis as two different religions, and they are stepping towards two different religions. The second one is state terrorism against citizens. In Iraq, since the beginning until 2003, there was state terrorism against own citizens. In Syria, the same problem, even in Turkey and Iran until now. So this is also a factor for the instability inside these status. And for this region also, there is another factor, which is failure to address the Kurdish issue within these countries. And my colleague mentioned the Ansar al-Islam, and there is these groups also. I can find reasons for the instability in the region regarding to this factor. And there is ongoing political tensions in the region. Of course, the interference of Iran and Turkey in Syria and Iraq, this is a major problem until now, and it is known for all political researchers. Now I'm going to, I think I have little time, subjective dimensions, yes, very quick. America, so this framework for me was very important because this framework, theoretical framework, is always exist, and we have always to expect the emergence of radical groups in the region. There is American international reports that there is 2,000 ISIS militants in between Iraq and Syria. This is a very huge, big number. So maybe I'm not saying 20,000, just half of this number is danger for the region. The first reason for the reorganizing ISIS is the displaced people. There is dozens of thousands of people living in camps in Kurdistan region and in Syria and in other places. So this is always a factor for instability and to profit, the radicalists to profit from this factor. And there is a difficult living conditions for these groups or displaced people in campus. For example, in Syria, there is a still chaotic situation. ISIS spread in around 4,000 square kilometers in the Badia, Syrian Badia, specifically between or in the administrative triangle of Aleppo, Hama, and Raqqa. So they are moving in this zone, and there is al-Hol camp, which is a very dangerous camp, and there is around 80,000 people in this camp. 94% of residents of this camp are women and children. And the dangerousness of these camps, I'm just giving you a few examples. Here, Daesh children attacking Al Arabiya reporter Rola Al Khatib a few months ago, and she's saying, why I am an infidel. They are children. She said, they said, because you are not wearing hijab or you are not wearing niqab. So the inside this camp, nobody knows what is going on. There is no control from Hasada or Americans or any other groups in this camp. And yeah, it is a kind of bomb, and there is many examples to show, but I don't have enough time. And the second reason is declaration of the end of the war. When the coalition declared the end of the war, the radicalists, ISIS militants, they could start reorganizing themselves, and they are never disappeared. They never disappeared, to say the returning of them. This group, ISIS, is they acquired a lot of skills to use technology. There is isolated, they live in isolated zones. So if there is no technology, they can contact, and they can't even recruit people, more militants, to their group. And for example, in Iraq, there is a place called Hadar. There is 100 villages in this place under the control of ISIS. And under the tensions of sectarian conflict, just 24 hours ago, the Al-Hashd al-Shabi, PMF in Iraq, the militia, they calls for evacuation of Sunni areas to cut. They said they are arguing that to cut support for ISIS. So this is the sectarianism is still a huge problem in Iraq. And I don't have enough time to speak about prisoners in Iraq, specifically children of ISIS who living in the prison. There is harsh psychological pressure on the detainees and pushing them to convert to Shia ideology or Shia religion or whatever. The fourth, just 1 minute if possible. The fourth reason is the political situation and security vacuum in that area, the Sunni areas in Iraq. There is many examples to show, specifically the attack of ISIS just a few days ago 18 Iraqis killed in multiple nighttime extremist raids. So there is some another information, but anyway, I'm stopping here, and maybe there is some questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibrahim. I don't know if you can stop sharing your screen, perhaps?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but I do hope we'll be able to get into a lot of these issues you're raising in the question and answer period. And there's a lot of issues related to this interference of Turkey and Iran, the existence of these militias on the ground, and the impact they have, as well as the question of IDPs, which is a very critical issue, both for obviously humanitarian reasons, but also, as you're saying, it is related to this resurgence. So I hope we have some more time. Before I turn over the floor to the questions, we have questions coming in. I can see them coming in. I'm actually going to take advantage of my moderator privileges to ask you each a question. So to Virginie, you know, what's so interesting in your article and in the presentation you made, I think you make such a strong case for how this process of fragmentation of Iraq, the failures of nation building, and this marginalization actually serve to allow for obviously the insurgency, different groups to rise, but it actually served to federate as well what were then heterogeneous Arab Sunni groups. But one thing you don't place emphasis on actually is the ideology itself of ISIS. And I'm wondering what role that ideology did or did not play in bringing people under the organization. And it's so interesting because obviously it did play a role in the foreign recruitment process. But perhaps it didn't play as much of a role as you were arguing that it's about this marginalization and the new order that came about. And I'm wondering now, in the wake of the experience of living under governance, the governance model of ISIS, has that had an effect on how people view the ideology? I mean, do we feel that there's maybe less public support for it after having lived that experience, or on the contrary, has that somehow been reinforced? So I'm just wondering how you situate the ideology historically and in this resurgence. And then to Ibrahim, you know, I found the title of your presentation so interesting because it's resurgence or reorganization. And of course, that's not just a semantics question, right? There's actual issues about what we mean. And Virginie, you had also said this, what do we mean by return versus resurgence? And you had spoken, Virginie, about this, the inventiveness of the organization, its ability to reinvent itself and to innovate on its model. And we didn't have enough time, I'm afraid, Ibrahim, but I was wondering if you could speak a bit about this process, this organizational process of resource acquisition. How does ISIS go about getting resources, whether they're material, human? You spoke a little bit about technology as a recruitment, but also financial resources. There was a question from, I'm assuming it's from YouTube, about how Daesh sustains itself economically. So how do they go about acquiring these resources today? So perhaps I'll let you two answer this, and then I'll take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So yes, in my article, I really wanted to focus on the American policy and the consequences of the US intervention. But of course, ideological dimensions were a factor of its development in Iraq and Syria. And the group has promoted and implemented its theological vision of the land, and its soldiers, they fight to achieve the goal of establishing Islamic rule on earth, like the creation of a state, a theocracy where Sharia law is enforced. And you can only become a member of ISIS if you are Sunni, and it's still the case today. So the ISIS project is at the heart of takfirism, which justify violence. And the call for holy war is made both against non-Muslims and against Muslims, who do not strictly respect the precept of Islam and the application of Sharia law. So this element is and was and is still used by Daesh to justify death sentence, slavery, like Ibrahim said before. And I think that military defeat doesn't mean ideological defeat. And for sure, the ideology is still present today, and it contributes to the resurgence of Daesh in Syria and Iraq, because ISIS still recruits members in both of these countries. And the local recruitment in Iraq and Syria is fueled by the anti-Shiite ideology and opposition to the what is considered as the apostate government in Damascus and the Shiite dominated government in Baghdad. So the Levant will remain one of the high places of jihadism because it's the historical land of the first Islamic territorial developments after the exit from Arabia. And the ideology does still attract today, but probably not as much as it did before the caliphate, as for Syria and Iraq, because it's different in other parts of the world.
Okay, thank you. Ibrahim?
Yes. First of all, when ISIS lost their territory or huge territory, they had own resources at that territory, but it doesn't mean they lost all the resources they had at that time, and they are profiting from the conflict, sectarian conflict between Shia and Sunni, and also there is throughout the world they are getting or gaining the support, economical support, and also the interfering of Turkey and Iran in the region. Turkey is supporting radicalist groups, and these radicalist groups has a kind of relationship with ISIS, and there is bridges between these groups. And inside of Iraq, there is tribal Sunni Arab militants, and also they are helping the ISIS group. So and there is also trading. They have still they are getting kind of tax from when they are controlling some main ways inside or Iraq and Syria, to get a kind of tax from people. So there is different resources, and I think they are getting step by step more support from around the world. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, we have a set of questions from Yasmin, who, and perhaps you'll need to be able to answer this, given that you live in the United States, you've been able to observe American foreign policy up close, which is, why would the US declare victory over ISIS if it isn't true? And also, what is left of the Kurds on the battlefield in northeast Syria? And the question is, do you think that the Assad regime infiltrated ISIS to secure its power?
Okay, so 3 questions. I will try to remind all of them. So the military defeat against the caliphate was concrete. It was something real in 2017 in Iraq and in 2019 in Syria. So I think, and because it's also important for the US that has involved many forces in the country for decades now, in Iraq especially. And I would say also that when al-Baghdadi was killed, Donald Trump also was saying that it's a big victory and that Daesh is defeated, it's the end. And so I think there might be two things. Maybe the first one is just to show some success, military success from the US. And the other is maybe that there is the threat is underestimated by US policy today about ISIS, and there is less involvement of the US in Middle East since 2011 and Barack Obama, which may also explain that the US don't want to be as much involved as they were before. And regarding the question about Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria, yeah, I think it's a real question that does the regime today does it want to fight ISIS in some areas, or really takes benefit of ISIS presence in some areas. So, for example, there was a withdrawal of Syrian troops in Badia Desert to go and fight some rebels in Idlib, which of course encouraged the resurgence of ISIS in that area. And last thing about the presence of Turkey, that was your question, I think, in northern Iraq.
Kurds, yes.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, the Kurds left on the battlefield, left alone on the battlefield. And
yeah, so for Iraq, for Syria, sorry, for example, the situation is different on the eastern part of the Euphrates River than on the southern part, because east of the Euphrates, the Kurdish are present, and they are today supported by the US. And that was one of my questions before, what will happen if there is a withdrawal of the troops? They might be replaced by some NATO soldiers. But again, everyone is waiting for Joe Biden's decision. And the situation is also different because the Kurdish, they try to reintegrate some ISIS fighters into the civilian society. There is a reconciliation in some areas on the eastern part of the Euphrates, and the situation on the western part of Euphrates, there is a lack of governance because many troops and civilian services from the Syrian army and administration are not present, or not as much as they should be.
Okay, thank you. Ibrahim, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Actually, about the northern Syria and the abandoned Kurdish militant or Kurdish situation there, it is expected from Americans. It was not the first time, and I think it is not the last time that they have been abandoned. And if they do that for the next time, I think it is in benefit of radicalism, and specifically because there is not just ISIS in Syria, there is many other groups, radicalist groups, specifically the groups which are supported by Turkey. They are all radicalists. They are just not united with ISIS, but it is the same ideology. So therefore, it is very dangerous if they abandoned the region in Syria.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question regarding foreign fighters. The question is, does ISIS still attract them, and what is the relation to Iraqi jihadists? Ibrahim, do you like
yeah, for me, what they mean from Iraqi jihadists? if you just...
So the question is, what is the relation between the foreign fighters and Iraqi jihadists?
Okay, foreign fighters.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the majority of jihadists or ISIS in Iraq are Iraqis. I think the majority of foreign fighters exist inside Syria, not inside Iraq. But there is some ISIS fighters inside Iraq, and the relation there is, yeah, they are part of this group, and the problem is about the families and children of the foreign fighters in a whole camp, and there is too many, maybe hundreds of families still waiting a solution. But a Syrian Kurdish authority announced it several times. These families need a solution, but still there is no solution. So yeah, that is a...
Virginie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I join Ibrahim about this coming decision, and I think that also the COVID situation may have stopped some displacement of people and also foreign fighter, making it may be more difficult for them to join Iraq and Syria.
Okay, there's also, since you're speaking about this issue of the prisons and that nothing is being done, there's a question about, or not enough is being done, certainly. Another question that's just come in from someone from the Zoom session, Naida, regarding if any rehabilitation programs are being put into place for the detainees.
In Iraq?
Iraq or Syria?
Yes. Yeah, specifically in Kurdistan region, there is hundreds of ISIS militants in the prison, and all of these militants are in the rehabilitation prisons. So there is different, children or adolescents, ISIS adolescents. They have a specific program for rehabilitation, and there is adults rehabilitation prison. In Iraq, there is a rehabilitation prison, but the problem is maybe more than half of these prisoners are not in the prison of the government. All militias has own prisons, so many of these prisons you don't know. Sometimes you don't know where they are. So that is the problem, and still. There is no solution for this kind of different prisons and different policy against these prisoners.
Okay, thank you. There's a question regarding Russian intervention in Syria and the role that could play or is playing in preventing the resurgence.
Do you want me to answer? Yeah. Yes. So Russia has become a major actor in Middle East, and the Vladimir Putin country has saved Bashar al-Assad regime, and they also took benefit on the development of ISIS to support and to consolidate the Syrian regime. So I don't think that the priority of Vladimir Putin right now is to stop ISIS resurgence in Syria nor in Iraq. I think the first objective goal is to consolidate the Syrian regime, and especially about with the Idlib territory that is still not under Bashar al-Assad's control.
Ibrahim, did you want to
I don't have much. There is the problem with Russia. yeah, it is clear that they are supporting a regime in Syria, and in another aspect, they are against the policy of Western countries. So what they know, they will doing anything to prevent the Americans' policy in the region. So they don't mind whatever that, but they will to, for example, if the Americans supporting Kurds, they are against. If Americans against the Kurds, they are supporting them. So it is a contradictional policy in the region.
Okay, thank you. We also had a question about the coalition created by Saudi Arabia in 2015. This is part of the Halima from the Zoom chat. 2015. Halima, maybe you could be more precise?
I don't know about this coalition, but coalition against the, yeah, I remember. There is a coalition against Houthi in Yemen. So they are still fighting Houthi in Yemen, but Houthi and another group is in Syria. They are proxy groups. So Iran is not fighting or fighting, for example, Saudi Arabia or Sunni political system in Yemen or in Syria or in Iraq through their proxy groups. So the problem for Saudi, they are making troubles for Saudi Arabia, and you know, Yemen on the borders of Saudi Arabia. So this coalition was to against this proxy group, Houthi in Yemen, but still there is no solution, maybe in the future.
I don't know, Virginie, if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yes, I think it's part of the competition between Arabia Saudi and Iran. During Cold War, they use other countries for these proxy wars. And I think, however, today, the kingdom seems very isolated. And that's why one of the reasons maybe they are trying to have discussion, new contact with Iran through Iraq, which was the case. There were several meetings in the previous week.
Okay, thank you. For the moment, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. I mean, obviously, this is not positive news, right, about the resurgence of Daesh. And obviously, a lot of the things you're saying, it feels sometimes a bit hopeless, right? We've got the situation with the detainees, the foreign fighters, the families, the children, the thousands of children who are stuck in these camps, and we don't really know what the solution is. We know we should do something, because not doing anything is not a good idea, and yet we don't really know what we can do. And obviously, these are very complicated issues. We have the issues of the proxy wars, the presence of foreign militants in these countries, and this incredible fragmentation, both of the political fabric, the security sectors, and also the social fabric that's happened in these countries. But I'm wondering if there's any small signs of something positive that's happening to counter the processes, to counter this resurgence and the currency of Daesh. Ibrahim, you had spoken about some rehabilitation programs. I mean, are we seeing any successes in those rehabilitation? Are we seeing, for example, any local community efforts that are striving through even very small scale reconstruction projects to somehow fight the sectarianization and this communitarianism that has installed itself? Are we seeing anything, even if it's very small, that can sort of show that another way is possible?
First of all, I'm afraid from the new administration, American administration in Iraq, because of Iran. Iran is interfering in the political situation in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the region. So if Iran not stopping doing that, then the situation may be expecting worse than we see now. And this is true about Turkey too. When we come to the rehabilitation, it has relation maybe there is different factors for the rehabilitation. In Kurdistan region, for example, if you go as a researcher, you can go meet and talk to the prisoners, and there is many ways to find the prisons. But in Baghdad, for example, because of the different militias and different prisons, and there is no central policy against those prisoners. So clarity is important, and the strategic rehabilitation in Iraq and in Syria is important, and including the support from maybe Americans, Western countries, to have a total policy to solve the problem of the specifically the foreigners. So it has a relation with different factors to come to an end for that.
Yeah, and I would add maybe the big issue with corruption that is, I would say, the backbone of all the whole disaster today in Iraq. And because there is corruption, there are inequalities, and there are many lacks of public services everywhere. And for me, the positive thing, if I may say, is that the former protest in Iraq took also place in Shiite, predominantly Shiite areas, which means it's not only the Sunnis against the Shiite government in Baghdad, it's also the people, the Shiite, that are against their own governments because of the huge and growing unemployment, and because no drinking water, power, shortage of power, and so on. So maybe if the protests are less based on a community affiliation, it might be maybe something to end corruption and the pro-Shiite elites in Baghdad. But otherwise, I think, like Ibrahim said, it's not very optimistic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, you're absolutely right that we have to also situate this within what's happening at the national political level in each country. And in Iraq, we're having these discussions about anticipated elections, and obviously this huge protest movement in the south. And as you're saying, this is a predominantly Shia region of the country. Same in Syria. The conflict dynamics are not just related, obviously, to ISIS and the resurgence and presence of ISIS, but also the regime itself and the regime's reacquisition of the territory. All right, we have another question regarding if any countries have been actively trying to repatriate their nationals that have joined ISIS, the foreign fighters. So their nationals who are detainees right now in Syria or in Iraq.
I don't think there is any countries repatriating the foreign fighters, but I don't. There is an attempt by the Kurdish administration in Syria. They are trying to bring coalition to find a solution for the fighters there. And there is still negotiation. And European, Western countries, they are afraid, because many of them from European countries, and they are afraid to bring those fighters back. And maybe they are trying to find a place, a safe place in Syria or in Iraq or somewhere else. Yeah, the Syrian Kurdish administration asked for a trial, an international trial, but still there is no answers.
Yeah, I think there is a lack of international rules so far, and also in Western countries. So, for example, in France, the France doesn't want to reintegrate these fighters and their families because there is a lack of laws. And like you said, Ibrahim, the countries, they just don't know what to do with these people, and which justice should organize a trial, and the fact that they still represent a threat for the countries.
Yeah. All right, we have a new question coming in, which is about governance and how governance was perceived by local populations in Syria and Iraq. And is it an experience that some would or be interested in repeating? This is, the question of this, having lived under this model and seen what that model looks like. Is that something that there's a desire to have that repeated, or is there a feeling that this is not something we want to have again? That governance model is not an ideal.
I don't think there is a desire from Sunni community specifically. So if they find from Sunni community. But if there is a kind of reconciliation between Sunni and Shia and more democratic system in Iraq and in Syria, still we have to wait. So I don't think because they were targeting many Sunnis too, and the Sunni cities were destroyed from ISIS, because of ISIS. So I don't think they find supporters or from the Sunni community to have another example or another control from ISIS. Maybe they are profiting from those militants in the region because of the conflict with the Shia, because of the problems with the Shia, but it is a kind of suicide if they accept another control of the ISIS in the Sunni Arab region.
Yeah, and I think the goal of ISIS today is not to control a territory.
Exactly.
Right now, there is no project of a new caliphate. So they still want to exist. They want to get some financial resources and to keep some cells in Syria and Iraq. But I don't think that there is a project of territorialized again in this area. Again, I think it's different in some African areas, for example.
And their tactic now is just attack and withdraw. They are attacking and withdrawing, and there is in different areas, but still in the Sunni territory. They can't enter Kurdish, for example, Kurdistan region or Shia territory. So they are just attacking and withdrawing. This is a kind of partisan war against Iraqi forces.
it seems to me that that marks a fairly important change then to the organization, right? I mean, the whole idea was that it was going to create this state, Islamic State, was that there was going to be this political territorial configuration. And what you're suggesting is that it's maybe moving into what we would look as maybe more of a classical model of these terror groups, these radical groups, right, where you've got cells that can be activated to wage insurgencies or pressure in places, and then sort of disappear again into the local population as best as possible. Yeah. So would you say that this is, I mean, Virginie, you had talked about this reinvention of the organization. Are we seeing this sort of move to a more classical model away from the idea of a caliphate itself?
Yeah, so for Syria and Iraq, yeah, I would definitely say yes. And what is interesting is that ISIS has located and created some network outside of these two countries before the fall of the caliphate. So, for example, in Egypt and the Sinai Desert, or in which country, in Sahel, for example, they were present before the collapse of the caliphate, and this is a big strength of the organization. And I think that in Sahel today, it's not the topic of the day, but to answer your question, I think that Sahel today is the region in the world where they are the most active and the most present around the Lake Chad in Sahel. So that's and the presence. We should go back to 2015 and 16 to see them present there. So 2 years before they collapsed in Iraq.
Right. I don't see any other questions. If there's any other questions, if anyone from the audience would like to ask a final question, please feel free in the chat. While we're waiting to see if any other questions come in, maybe if Ibrahim or Virginie, if you have any final reflections.
The solution for the extremism in the region, specifically in Syria and in Iraq, and also in Turkey, there is strong groups inside Turkey and strong groups inside Iran. We just saw yesterday in a Kurdish city, some extremists attacked people, vulnerable people on the street. So there should be maybe a strategy for the whole region to find a solution, political solution, and regarding the political system in the region, more democratization of the status, and solution for the minorities, for human rights. So there is more factors relating to each other to reduce this kind of extremism in the region. So how long we are going towards democratizing the society, the radicalism and the economic situation also have big influence of this ideology. So there should be a strategy to find a solution for the region, because it is around, for Iraq is 20 years maybe, and in Syria is more than 10 years. So the region is not is not difficult to have this chaos inside the society, and people are not anymore. They will want a quick solution for that.
And yes, I join Ibrahim. I think there is a mix of scales, local scale, national scale, and regional scale issues in that area. So I think first, maybe with less foreign countries intervention, there could be an improvement. And second, I repeat what you just said, more democracy. I said more democracy for Iraq and basic, at least, democracy for Syria to start, and a better political representation in both of these countries. And trying to make as well, maybe, and I will quote Adel Bakawan, moving forward from an impossible to a possible state that would do what he has to do in providing jobs, health, education to hold the population. And so I think it's a combination of different factors that would allow or not Daesh to continue the resurgence in these two countries.
Okay, thank you very much. It's obviously it's a big challenge. Obviously, we're talking about very important systemic changes, but of course, this is what populations have been demanding, certainly since 2011 and earlier. So, you know, this is what you're saying is very much in line with what we're hearing from the ground, from social movements, from different political organizations on the ground. I don't see any other questions, so I think we're going to go ahead and bring today's event to an end. I want to thank both of our speakers, Virginie and Ibrahim, for not only wonderful presentations that were very thorough and got into so many different details, but also the attention you paid to the questions and to answering them and providing so much additional detail and very varied subjects as well. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, both looking at these contextual factors, these grievances, as well as the subjective factors that have been leading to this, and the organizational factors that have been leading to this resurgence. And I'd also like to thank iReMMO for hosting this event today, for bringing us together to talk about this. And please do go to their website to get access to the article and the new edition of Confluences Méditerranée, which is dedicated to the issue of Iraq, this special issue. So thank you very much. I wish you all a very pleasant evening or day for those who are joining us from the United States. Goodbye.
Thank you.
I see for you. Thank you.